When I was a child, I felt certain, as I think almost all children do, that I would discover how to avoid death. I thought I could do it alone. That was naive. I can't do it alone. I need your help. Together, we can build a social body that will enable us, its creators, to simulate the experience, but who knows, maybe even the fact of deathlessness, in a surprisingly animate form, like a person made out of people who live and die. But first, we must kick down this pro-death status quo. Quote, "Side by side with creative activities," writes V. Gordon Childe, "the emergence of civilization in Sumer coincides with the first direct evidence for organized homicide. While the majority of the Uruk seals depict cult scenes, craftsmen at work, or heraldic groups of animals, a few seals from Eric E. Anna IV present the king on the battlefield. Bound captives in a war chariot are explicitly represented. At the same time, piriform, that is, flame-shaped mace heads, may be regarded as weapons of war. The bound captives may be taken as evidence for slavery. The chariot shows the new-wheeled vehicle employed as a military engine. My name is Marephinus. Every generation contains one of me. I speculate that every generation contains one of everyone, an endless stream of me's, of you's, since time immemorial. I don't mean reincarnation. I mean intergenerational spirit family. Should you jostle against yourself as you make your way through the crowd that throngs history, note how you feel. Angry, shattered, indifferent. If you are there and you want to do something about it, you and I are here, and we are one. Now let us proles avail ourselves of the power of magic. Let's read each other's mind. At first the hints are random, soon they're sequential. Finely attuned, we will a ray of ire, focused to ignite the tanks of angst. A disciple new to Buddhism once confessed to me, "I can't nullify my I without eyeing my nullifier." By his I, he meant his ego. I answered that he had hit upon the fundamental critique of Buddhism. Because the disciple cannot suppress his own ego without it popping up elsewhere, he must surrender it to a guru. And although the dictatorship comprised of guru and disciple is benevolent, it nevertheless reinforces instead of undermines the not-so-benevolent economic dictatorship of dominators over subjects. In the 4th century BC, writes M.I. Finley, Xenophon put forth a scheme whereby every citizen could be maintained by the state, chiefly from revenues to be derived from publicly owned slaves working in the mines. But what is it like working in the mines? According to a contemporary, Diodorus Siculus, quote, "The men engaged in these mining operations produce unbelievably large revenues for their masters, but as the result of their underground excavations day and night, they become physical wrecks. And because of their extremely bad conditions, the mortality rate is high. They are not allowed to give up working or have a rest, but are forced by the beatings of their superiors to stay at their places and throw away their wretched lives as a result of these horrible hardships. Some of them survive to endure their misery for a long time because of their physical stamina or sheer willpower, but because of the extent of their suffering, they prefer dying to surviving." Look down this sentence. Who do you see? no one but you and me, passing from word to word through reed rock. We remain unconscious of the paradox jumbo shrimp because we're hungry and we want to eat them, not think about them. But the paradox, where does it live while we're dining out of town? It lives in the part of mind that's out of mind, that's in mind, but in a thought which is isolated from other thoughts, the way people on the street are disconnected from and avoid, shear off from one another. When thoughts connect, we have an idea. When people do, we associate. Quote, "The one country I have not mentioned as paying taxes to Persia," Herodotus mentions, is Persia herself, for the simple reason that she does not pay any. Persia doesn't pay taxes because taxes are the tribute paid by the subjugated to the subjugator. Cyrus and his boys succeeded in subduing the Medes, so the Medes work for the Persians and pay taxes to them rather than the other way around. Had the Persians paid taxes to the state of Persia, then the state would have conquered and enslaved its own people. This is the very point Jesus makes with regard to the exploitation of the Jews by their own priesthood when the tithe collectors come round. What's your opinion, Rocky? From whom did the kings of the earth collect import duties and tithes? From their own citizens or from foreign subjects? And Rocky answers, from foreign subjects. Yes, indeed, Jesus replies. Their own citizens are exempt from those taxes. Matthew 17. So, if we pay taxes because we have to, rather than choose to in order to protect our investments, we've been conquered, but are too brainwashed to notice it. We can leave this sentence any time, but only together. You say when, I'll say where. Is that fair? Call me junkie if you like, but I got to feel alive to want to live. This sentence is haunted. The next sentence is vacant. For in the early times, recalls Thucydides, the Greeks and the barbarians of the coastal islands, as communication by sea became more common, were tempted to turn pirates under conduct of their most powerful men, the motive being to serve their own cupidity and to support the needy. They would fall upon a town unprotected by walls and consisting of a mere collection of villages, and would plunder it. Indeed, this came to be the main source of their livelihood, no disgrace being yet attached to such an achievement, but even some glory, unquote. Here's what revolution is really about. We were sitting at village when you appeared and killed and enslaved us. We have a score to settle. All bosses, even against their will, represent the original killers. All workers, however much in denial, represent the original victims. I could die any time, panic with no place to flee, because flight will be canceled in mid-flight. Society should console by outliving me with my approval, but I can't approve and remain a friend of man. I'm not free to be anyone but me. I'm as much me as meat will allow, routinely out of control like a candle flame. How can I tell what stays, what goes, until I step out of my toes? Hegel said the state is the center of civilization. That's like saying the nail in the head unifies the man. Just as a womb is zoned for infant production, so the world is zoned for crowd or mass production, the production of a massive, of a myriad number of infantamites, of an infantry of infants, of a world womb for the production of a social body. Quote, "A man cannot become a child again, or he becomes childish," Marx muses in the Grundrisse. But does he not find joy in the child's naivete? And must he not strive to produce its truth at a higher stage?" Unquote. I am who my body imagines itself to be. It imagines it's me. It imagines I'm he. When all shall unite, our bodies shall prove right. It's time for the members of our species to update itself, to invent a fiction representing themselves, which is sufficient improvement on the present model as to be desirable, but not so bizarre as to contradict itself. While checking the spelling of bizarre, B-I-Z-A-R-R-E, I see that bizarre, B-A-Z-A-A-R, a collection of shops selling merchandise, comes from the Persian word bazar. In checking for possible Hebrew cognates, because I happen to have a good Hebrew dictionary, I stumble upon the Hebrew word bazus, which means, holy shit, spoil or plunder. The bazaar is where the plundered city ends up after it has been broken down into saleable items. The bazaar is the mother of merchandising. No wonder business smells of dreck and blood. Anyhow, I would like to suggest that each of us transfer title to ownership of him or herself to a fictional character called Menschlichkeit the First, the one, the only. Now, Menschlichkeit is not a god. It is not even superhuman. Let me explain what Menschlichkeit is. You know how when you think about yourself, you assume the point of view of an objective bystander, thoughtfully contemplating your life? Now, doesn't this objective bystander, while being in your mind, and thus inside you, give every appearance of occupying a position closer to the outside world than the you whom it observes? Well, I recommend that we follow through on the potential sociability of our self-observing alter egos by all of us voluntarily consolidating them into a single observer called Menschlichkeit. Furthermore, once Menschlichkeit enjoys a social life among us, it's a short step for us to agree that the person inside observing me and the person inside observing you is the same person, who, because we equally share it, we are equal to each other. Menschlichkeit, therefore, expresses our equality with each other. Finally, we confirm our equality by owning the economy in common, the economy. Never mind how diversely we contribute to it. Nature made the past and present of man, but mankind itself shall make its future. Just as nature makes stone and wood, fire and sand, so nature makes man. But just as a man builds a house, so he contrives a world. Unless we acknowledge the inevitability, however far in the future, of the death of the species, not only of society as we know it, but the extinction of all traces of a knowing us, we feel crushed in spirit by our brief lifespan. However, once we do acknowledge it, we happily forego the consolation of rationalizing our impotence by surrendering to a power greater than ourselves, which we ourselves have not created, but presumably has created us, and for that very reason feels at liberty to trample upon us. One anthill dominates another, making it work like ants, while it relaxes with the ladybugs. We all equally own our own bodies. Now, since all our bodies together add up to the social body, then we all hold equal shares in the social body. Therefore, how some came to dominate the social body, while others came to be subjugated by it, is the mad tale of losing count. in order to count. In an ownership culture, I am taught to own myself. However, if I own myself, then I divide into owning and own parts. The person who owns my will, I salute as boss. The persona who carries out the behests of my will, I consider my help, my workforce. But who is this I who shares us between it? This disembodied voice who pulls for both with all its spectral might. People differ from one another like languages, like rivers. People resemble each other like faithful translations, like seawater. Quote, when the day of slavery catches up with a man, wide-seeing Zeus takes away half of his mind. Unquote. Odyssey, Book 17. Beautiful contrast here between the omniscience of the god and the contraction of the mind of the slave. For the slave will go to any length to distract himself from a servitude which his masters have convinced him is inevitable. Even today, people would rather have a good laugh than a better world. A slave is entirely without the faculty of deliberation, says Aristotle. The slave participates in reason, but only insofar as he is capable of grasping the reasons of his master, writes Plato in the Laws. The employee participates in reason, but only insofar as he is capable of grasping the reasons of his employer. Property, property, will you be my property? I will be, I will be. I will be your property if you be mine. Piece A owns piece B, but piece B owns piece A. Where boundaries overlap, there stirs the collective. There sleeping beauty fingers herself awake. Some words become actions. Others coast into poem and equilibrate. A poem is a thing made out of words, which enters a thing made out of flesh and sings in it, like a bird in a cage. Life after death belongs to the not yet born. The saints will please cease haggling over overtime. Under capitalism, the egalitarian must avoid the logical trap of proving him or herself superior to the competition in order to earn the right to be heard. Fear not obscurity. The daughter of death likewise loves life. Do not refuse her the recognition she deserves. Impulses, feelings, instincts, the brain, manifesting as consciousness, screens and coordinates them all, and thereby makes explicit their powers and contributions, their biases and predilections, their excesses and shortcomings. But the very act itself of monitoring, of warning when one element or another jeopardizes the integrity of the whole, this drive toward the unity on the part of consciousness, which, if the truth be told, is merely an extension of the body's detachment from other bodies, its independence elevated into a sacred principle. This drive toward unity on the part of consciousness can become a mania, literally a monomania, an obsession with oneness, as the monitor unifies to excess so that future growth is stifled, unlooked for opportunities missed. Hence the desirability of the brain braining itself, of monitoring its own activity in the self-conscious act of critically examining the implications of its own excesses and shortcomings. Self-consciousness loosens up the unity by the simple expedient of mirroring itself, of doubling itself in the act of self-awareness, and thereby invites itself to step out of itself into the social body through the looking glass. The illusion of youth, of feeling dumb, peaks with the illusion of age, of feeling wiser. One god whispers to another, "I've heard one dies horribly. Shell torn from one's back, tooth through the skull like a golden spike at infinity." Unable to die, the gods obviously experience death at second hand. The purpose of the society created by the revolution, writes Marx, is to make, quote, everyone's time free for their own development, unquote. Development, from the Latin de velo, to unveil oneself, to take off the wrapper. The image implies faith, if not certainty, in the potential of the self, at least as much faith as a photographer has that a latent image will appear if the film is subjected to chemical discipline. But if I unveil myself, I must divide into unwrapper and wrap. But the unwrapper who unwraps the wrap is also wrapped up in the wrap. How can I be all three? How can I watch myself jump out of a cake? Easy. I televise myself jumping out of the cake and watch myself jump on the closed-circuit screens I wear as spectacles. When the child moves the toy car across the floor with its hand, it imagines it is inside driving the car, outside watching the car being driven, and the motive force of the hand, material existence, the economic factor, as much as possible, is rendered unconscious. What happens if the child operates the car remotely? Since the child propels the car across the floor almost without effort, we can claim with some justice, I think, that the more advanced the technology, and hence the more remote the cause of the movement, the deeper the child's unconsciousness of the economic factor. The rich child is bullied into bellowing, the poor child cowed into lowing. "I'm an oak in a poke," the acorn chuckles, but its dad admonishes, "You're a corn, boy. Any more talk of 100 feet tall, and it's off to the chowder house with you." I'm conscious and unconscious at the same time. For when I almost remember a name, when it's on the tip of my tongue, as we say, my impression is that the forgotten name is much closer to being remembered than to oblivion. But closer to implies that oblivion and memory, though they are out of sight of each other, nevertheless somehow occupy the same space. If so, then the area of the space just out of range of my attention when a name is on the tip of my tongue must exist, although I am unconscious of it. Or when I remember, as the verb implies, do I produce another member? Do I actually plant a seed saved from the fruit of awareness and literally grow it again? Anyhow, language is so suggestive that we're never sure whether it documents reality or merely talks to itself. The wet room was stuffy. I had to get out. The dry room is stuffy. But this time before I leave, I'm taking hostages. Deep mind like deep wind, burn for it. At last I board and fly beyond the body's mantle into shiny silence, where I orbit like a pod around the moon. Dead language. The poems in the language slowly lose altitude, as images feather at random, until words look as much alike as corpses. Psst, contracted from the Greek epos. May I have a word with you? Prose. The images conform to the sequence of thought. Poetry. Sequence and images arise spontaneously to show each other off to best advantage. Exploitative analogy. holding images apart, preventing their conjunctio in order to extract likeness and sell it as raw intention. Free the images yoked to yokel logos. Unbolt them from the workhouse wall of analogy. Loyalty to a common origin? Friends, that's passé. We left home when God fell to the ground, riddled with infinity. My job is to greet the future, apologize for the delay, the decay, then run for my life. One dark night the wind drank wine and blew a kiss around the world. The etymological root of SOC, of the word society, and the root SEC of the word sequence are cognate. That is, society and sequence ultimately have the same meaning. Do you follow me? Members of the same species share the same room in inner space. Of different species, different rooms in the same house. Organic and inorganic, porch and yard. The driving force of poetry lies in the belief that just as Tokyo and Topeka ultimately share the same sky, so your dream and mine ultimately arise from identical darkness. If I think the world of myself, and the world includes everyone, then to myself I'm everyone. If the same is true for you, that you think the world of yourself, and therefore to yourself you're everyone, then evidently I include you among my everyone, just as you include me among yours. We're each 1/5 billionth of each other, just by thinking the world of ourselves. Smaller than a mustard seed, than an atom. But just let some smasher try to split us, then watch our chain reaction. I am a self-aware object. Suppose I stand in a crowd of self-aware objects. Since each is aware of itself as part of the crowd, to what extent, if any, is the crowd aware of each as part of itself? Fame, monopolized by the celebrity dead, clogs up the channels of communication between the living and the not yet born, rubs the static dead into their faces. Human progress. Kill a man. Sell a man. Sell a man something. Wish a man well. It's clear to me that we can't accomplish the last quarter without sharply turning a corner.